इनको ऑनलाइन कर दीजिए, लाइव कर रहे हैं क्या?
So let's have all students here. So when you click pictures, it will be on this way.
अच्छा, ये दे रहे हैं कैमरा क्या?
Okay, so
he's starting that laptop. वो लैपटॉप हमें दे रहे हैं? I think they're changing the laptop also, Gurjeet.
Okay.
How are things? What's happening generally, Gurjeet?
Life is become a book. I was in Nairobi and then I had to rush to Bali, and now I'm back and I'll very soon be in Buenos Aires, as I just told Professor Chen.
What is this about? This is about your book, or what is it?
No, Buenos Aires is a 3-week holiday.
Oh, that's great.
But yes, Nairobi was on my South-South work, and Bali was on the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific.
And this is as an independent consultant, or you're working with somebody?
I don't work for anybody here. I just get invited.
Ah, that's great, Royal.
Contribute my views.
Amazing. Oh, congratulations, great work. Amazing.
No, but the one in Nairobi, yes, that is the Sankalp Africa Summit, which we organize every year, and now for 11 years. So I have been the chairman of that company for 4 years. So that is my event. That is our event.
Yeah, it goes back a long way. No, you were deputy high commissioner there at one time.
So
I remember when I was offered that position in 2000, I think.
Yeah, correct.
In
Just as
succession. Yeah, DHC.
we can start now.
अभी तो लाइव हमें तो देखने हाँ it's here we
can see you guys now.
We are online. Yes.
Okay,
please,
great.
please
Okay,
start.
so we will start now live. Okay.
Live कर दीजिए.
So good morning everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion on South-South cooperation, exploring the potential of India's partnership with Africa, Latin America and Asia. I am today's session moderator, Professor Dr. Hibatullah Adam, Professor and Academic Dean at the Jindal School of International Affairs, founder and director of Jindal Center for the Global South, and the Associate Director at Jindal India Institute, OP Jindal Global University. We are honored to have with us today an esteemed panel of experts. We have Professor George Shediq, former Director and Envoy of the United Nations Secretary General, United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, and visiting professor at Catholic University in Argentina. Ambassador Gurjeet Singh, former ambassador of India to the African Union, Ethiopia, and Djibouti, among other countries. Ambassador Ravi Tapar, Professor of Diplomatic Practice and Executive Dean at Jindal School of International Affairs. And will join us very soon, Ambassador Sanjeev Arora, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, Adjunct Professor and Distinguished Fellow at OP Jindal Global University. South-South cooperation has emerged as a critical driver for development in recent decades. India, with its vast experience and resources, has the potential to play a significant role in fostering partnership with countries in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Today's discussion will explore the opportunities and challenges of South-South cooperation, focusing on India's partnerships with these regions. So now let's delve into a thought-provoking discussion. We will start by opening questions to be addressed to each of my esteemed guests today. So let's start first with Ambassador Singh. Ambassador Singh, given your vast experience in the African continent, including being, as I have mentioned, the former India's ambassador to the African Union and several African countries, being also a development cooperation advisor and the former chairman of the Confederation of the Indian Industry Task Force on trilateral partnerships in Africa. In your opinion, what are the promising areas for India-Africa collaboration? And if you could please share with us some examples and what are the existing challenges. Ambassador Singh.
Thank you so much, Professor Adam. And I thank my esteemed colleague, Ambassador Ravi Thapa, for inviting me today. Very happy to see all the young people around you. Particularly happy to see Professor Cherik today, right across the world. Yes. Thank you. So, you have rightly pointed out that I was a diplomatic practitioner for enhancing South-South cooperation with Africa. But as in my book, The Harambe Factor, I have pointed out that India actually implemented what we today call South-South cooperation much before the term ever came into being. In fact, the ITEC program was launched in 1964, and South-South came about later. And India had already started scholarships and other things in as early as 1950. But during the time that India-Africa Forum summits were held from 2008, the economic and social content of South-South cooperation was accentuated to a very large extent. And I think over 15 years, from about 2003 to 2018, India put in about $12 billion of soft loans, about $1 billion of grants, and a very large number of 50,000 scholarships, including through the Pan-African e-network project. So I think India's South-South cooperation model had grants, had technical cooperation, and had a large amount of institution building in Africa. Plus, the Indian FDI was often seen by African countries as part of development cooperation. Now, this is not the OECD definition of South-South cooperation, but certainly African countries saw it like this. Now, presently, what I believe the best way forward is that due to debt stress, countries cannot borrow money, soft or hard. So we have to find ways of achieving the SDGs through development cooperation, which also brings responsibility on the South-South partners. It should not be a one-way grant. And in any case, they cannot afford the credit line. So, I have just come back from Nairobi from the 11th edition of the Sankalp Africa Forum. What we do here is we bring together African ideas of entrepreneurship, which will implement the SDGs. And we link them to investors. So this time we had 1,500 entrepreneurs and 88 investors who were all milling around this event for 2 days, sharing ideas and attracting investors. One example I can give you is of a company in the coastal region of Kenya, which cuts across 3 SDGs. Why? They touch food security by pushing cassava, a local crop. No imports of rice and wheat. Push cassava. Second, use cassava for renewable energy, a second SDG. And third, all their farmers are women. So that is another SDG. Now, they can lead to positive poverty alleviation and improvement, provided you find investors into their company. And this is what we were doing at Sankalp. So what we try to do through impact investing is look at SDGs, how to implement them, guide companies who want to invest in that. So this is not a grant, this is an investment. It has a business plan, it requires responsibility. And then you have what I have been calling trilateral cooperation. Because the funds that we are raising are actually coming from traditional donors of the G7. They are actually putting money into the funds that our company raises. So this is what brings together north, south, east, west. The whole aim is, can we achieve the ultimate goal of South-South cooperation, which is benefit the people directly by implementing the SDG. I would like to stop here for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Ambassador Singh. Now, please, I have my next question to Professor Shadiq. Professor Shadiq, with your extensive experience at United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, how do you see South-South cooperation evolving as an alternative to traditional development finance? Could you please explain how it can foster development in countries in Global South?
First, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for the question, which brings me a lot of different angles. But let's start by this way. South-South cooperation was born first as an idea. It was practiced last century, since Bandung, India, as the Ambassador Singh mentioned, launched ITEC in the 60s, and other countries also contributed. But South-South cooperation did not really take off until this century, the 21st century. Why? Because we had countries in the South that achieved a level of success in many development dimensions that generated interests of other countries of the South. Then resources became available, and also some of the organizations that were geared towards North-South cooperation committed resources and institutional engagement to promote exchanges among developing countries. And there is an issue that I always bring to the table, which is the fall of the transaction costs. My first job in the UN in 1990 in one office in Turkey was to compile the best practices in Turkey to prepare one-pagers that were compiled in a book that was issued every 2 years. That was basically the database of available experience in the South. And there was no way, and the opportunity cost of establishing exchanges was enormously high. This century, all that went down. Listen, I'm participating now in an event in India where most of you are physically from Buenos Aires at 2:30 in the morning, and I can share and learn with you without the limitation of space. So South cooperation took off. It became much more important. But now you say, I want to take exception to one of the points you made in your question, which is how it can replace North-South cooperation. South-South cooperation should not replace North-South cooperation, because North-South cooperation has to continue, and South-South cooperation should be complementary to that of the traditional donors, which have an obligation, not just moral, but even legislative obligation, to contribute to building a much fairer world. So we should not see South-South cooperation in the same parameters. That was, during my tenure as director of the office, a big fight we had with the Development Assistance Committee of the OECD that wanted to include South-South cooperation, utilizing all their parameters, their evaluation methodology, their quantification, etc. And we, from this Global South, resisted this attempt from them to incorporate us into that methodology, that political interpretation. Also, I have to say that the South, in the last decade, particularly in the last decade, since the financial crisis in the North, has achieved more relative power in the world. There's no accident that the G7 had to call the G20 to confront the financial crisis. It was not enough for the 7 traditional rich economies to deal with that global phenomenon. And now that we are in such a position with a more balanced power structure. Actually, we have a better balance of power, but we have to make a big effort from the global south to achieve a rebalancing of the institutions of the global governance. And by that, we mean institutions like the United Nations, particularly the Security Council, for which India is a natural candidate, and there is no reason and no possible justification for that great country not to be in the Security Council, to the multilateral financial institutions. And for that, I want to pay tribute to the leadership that India demonstrated during the recent G20, where this issue was put very strongly on the table. India presented itself very rightly as the champion of the global south, achieving, among other things, the inclusion of the African Union to the G20. In sum, we are at a great time for South-South cooperation in terms of increasing in volume, relevance, and also impact in the building of a better world and achieving global agendas, including the 2030 agenda. But we need more leadership. I don't want to go into that in this particular answer, but the recent meetings of the G77, the South by excellence in both Havana and Kampala, were perhaps not as satisfactory as they should have been. I can go into that at a later time, but for now, I leave it there. Over.
Okay, thanks, Professor Shadiq. Now I would like to ask my next question to Ambassador Ravi Thapar. So from your perspective as India's ambassador to several Latin American countries, what are some of the key areas where India can collaborate with Latin American countries for mutual benefits to build stronger partnership and to advance South-South cooperation?
Thank you so much, Professor Hebatullah. It's an honor to be on an esteemed panel where learned experts like Professor Jorge Shadiq, Ambassador Gurjeet, my former colleague from MEA, Ambassador Sanjeev Arora, and others are here. Also, the keen students in JGU and distinguished attendees who are online. I want to get to the heart of the matter. According to me, based on my sustained exposure, I think that a very, very critical issue in this is there are some typical areas. There's a technology, digital divide, there's a financial divide, there's an economic divide, and there is a general feeling of neglect and despondency, if I may say so. The multilateral system, established very, very courageously and valiantly about 80 years ago, has apparently failed. And what was assured by the Bretton Woods system has not delivered. Bilateral and regional aid does issue, but it's not enough. And the COVID-19 has not done anything. And technology changing as it is, almost on a quarterly or a yearly basis, I think the divide is becoming more and more extreme. So I have always said in some of my writings and utterances that restless societies create restless communities and nations. And restless nations lead to disorder and disruption of global peace. So I think it is very right that the Global South is receiving top priority. Now, for me, based on what India has done and my experience in handling some of these themes, I think we should go the India way, which means that we have to create knowledge proficient societies, which means that we must use digital highways to the utmost. We don't have time. And there is not enough resources to set up physical facilities. But India is an IT superpower. I think we should go the electronic way and start streaming in across to various experts, talented communities all across the world. we are already setting up centers of IT excellence. I have myself, had the privilege of being to some of these. We give grants and set up centers of IT excellence. But I would submit and suggest that we should now upgrade this to polycenters of excellence, which means that different streams of expert and expertise realms, whether it is agriculture, whether it is healthcare, etc., should be there in some of these countries. And we should constantly sustain and nourish these centers with digital, information. What we cannot transport physically, we will handle it from here digitally. I say this because India itself has become an important economy and power today, economic power, based on the services sector. One very important transition for an economy is to upgrade itself from the primary sector to the secondary and tertiary sectors. In order to do that, I think skills and expertise is the most important thing. And there is enough appetite for this. I mean, I have met presidents, for example, in Panama, in Costa Rica, the Nicaragua leadership. I've been in Lebanon, and everywhere there's a thirst for learning from India. We're already doing this under the ITEC program, but we need to upgrade all this. And if we can't put physically the experts and get people here, well, we need to go digital. I think it's much easier. We have the capability. We need to design the software. We need to get the digital resources set up. Once that is there, I think it is automatic that the southern communities become more powerful. And I am foreseeing in this model two things. One is, of course, that they will kind of catalyze their peers and their own, communities within their countries to upgrade, which means that there would be some compulsory incentive, ambition, aspiration to set up small infrastructural facilities there. And of course, we hope that at some point, whether it's to multilateral funding or donors like India, Japan, US, or whatever, some physical infrastructure can also be set up. But essentially, once the knowledge streams are there, just like India did, we went the technology way. We made sure that our services sector really looks up, and we became recognized as an India brand. Today, Indian scientists, technologists are everywhere. Now, there's another consequence of this, which is that when these countries, the southern countries, which feel so neglected when they go to multilateral gatherings in the WTO, UNGA, etc., when they go there, they are more informed about the nuances of multilateral, rule-making, decision-making. And once you create these knowledge streams, once you create critical awareness about what is the best for them in the future, they will also become better negotiators with the World Bank, with the IMF, and with other with bilateral donors. So there's a complete quality change in their society, and this means, of course, a lot of work on the part, like Ambassador Gurjeet said, that the southern countries must themselves put in something. There's a lot of accountability there because they themselves have to put in, that hard work and diligence. Only then will they receive the knowledge and the information which they're getting across. So essentially, we will upgrade their knowledge streams in various sectors, be it agriculture, be it healthcare, be it education, of course, business and financial services. We can also help them, of course, with some things from our side. I mean, we're very, very good in space research. We can put up satellite. We give them satellite facilities for telecom, for disaster management, and even for telemedicine and teleeducation. So, of course, on a separate note, and I don't want to monopolize the discussion, on a separate note, we could also maybe upgrade the degree of actual financial disbursal of loans and facilities. To date, I think we have, until now, given about $32 billion of aid, lines of credit. Out of these, 15 or 16 billion have gone to Asian countries. We've given about 200 scholarships plus since 1964. We need to upgrade all this, but we will, of course, have to calibrate it depending on their ability to absorb this aid, to utilize it properly, and, of course, keeping our own challenges in mind. So the important thing is once this critical kind of awareness is created, I think it will also provoke or stimulate a lot of unified position and posturing by the global south. Right now, they just swing with the wind and the current. Anyone who comes to them, talks to them, they just go in that direction. But once they're aware of the criticalities, once they have the expertise, I think they will have more informed analysis and response to the challenges. And this should actually help to unify the global south together, so that when they come to gatherings in the WTO or the UNGA, they will take unified positions, and naturally that will give them a better bargaining vis-a-vis the north. The last point which I do need to emphasize here is that India must show leadership in forging consensus amongst the global south, because this is the only way that they will get a better deal and better attention by the global north. And the one way to do this is by emphasizing that the wealthy multinational entities of the global north do make money and depend on their wealth by selling their goods and services in the populous markets of the south. Were it therefore not for the south and the communities there, they will not be able to sell their goods and services. So there is a joint destiny, there is a complementarity in working together. This point needs to be driven home. And once the outreach, the ambit, and the profile of the southern countries goes up with knowledge-based societies and communities there, I think this will start happening. So these are some of my thoughts, which I hurriedly, kind of shot off, but there could be more discussion on this. Thank you so much.
For sure. Thanks, Professor Tapar. My next question is to Ambassador Sanjeev Arora. So, Ambassador Arora, given your expertise in the Middle East and Asia, definitely you will provide valuable insights to our today's discussion. How can India leverage its existing partnerships in the Middle East and Asian countries to further South-South cooperation, and what potential areas exist for expansion?
Yeah. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. First of all, I would like to greetings and best wishes. Truly an honor. Dr. Hatullah Adam, who heads the Jindal Center for the Global South here, and I feel that this is the first, but this will not be the last opportunity to join your center's really multifaceted and really very, very meaningful and substantive activities. And very happy to be in the august company of my distinguished senior colleagues and friends. One of them in the virtual mode, Ambassador Gurjeet Singh, and of course my very dear friend and colleague, Ambassador Ravi Thapar, with whom I started our diplomatic voyage together in Cairo. Wonderful memories, And besides all the professional stuff, we used to prepare breakfast together on a toaster. He'll tell you later. Now, I don't have any prepared remarks, but I think encouraged by the very stimulating discussion that I have listened to. And as Dr. Adam knows, I was on campus very early today, but I had some other meetings. Otherwise, I would have been here in time. Now, let me, Dr. Adam, without going much into the historic perspective, you see, my colleagues have gone as far back as the summit. Of course, you see, during the heydays of NAM, are very proactive involvement in South-South cooperation. And also, I was listening to the remarks of Professor Shadid, I think part of which gave a very interesting historic perspective. But I'll not dilate on that. But yeah, just 2 or 3 observations. You see, when we talk of whether it is in Asia or in Latin America or in the Middle East, or of course Africa, this vast continent, you see, our collaborations go back to really the initial phase of our foreign policy. It it was really at the beginning of 60s that the Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program was started, which over the years has grown so much. It also has become so much more diversified in terms of the sector, areas of involvement and all. So capacity building, of course, has been a very major area, and that needs to be very substantially upgraded as our technological expertise and in the services sector, especially digital divide, and all those areas. And now, of course, things have come a long way from the early 60s or late 50s, and especially after the wide-ranging economic liberalization that started in 91 in India and the growing process. So there is a lot, and it has to be partnership. And I think that is really the hallmark of Indian approach, which has been very steadfast, I think, right from the beginning in terms of South-South cooperation, that it is a long-term, dependable, sustainable partnership. You see, and we, of course, have, it is heartening that we have been involved in some projects that are very different from the nascent phase of our South-South cooperation. I think one example that readily comes to my mind is, the construction of this very impressive parliament building in Kabul, besides a host of other areas in which we are strengthening their capacity, whether it is the police force or administrative services, etc. And that we are doing with a large number of other developing countries as well. Well, let me give you a few now examples of how, naturally I speak as a practitioner, from the practitioner standpoint, how this dynamics plays out and becomes a win-win situation in various fora and formats. Look at the initiative that was taken several years back, comprising India, Brazil, and South Africa, IBSA. You see, 3 developing countries, 3 large emerging economies, 3 prominent democracies in 3 different parts of the world. I mean, you have Asia, you have Africa, and you have Latin America, all 3 continents covered by this morning session. And you see, this, of course, came up with some proposals. The implementation has been less than what was envisaged, but there is a lot of potential, you see. Then I'll give you the example of how, we engage with fellow developing countries under the auspices of the United Nations. You see, for 4 years, I was Government of India's designated nodal officer for the UNGA sessions, all the New York-centric issues as head of the UN political division in MEA. Now there, you see, it is truly on a daily basis. Every day of our engagement there is a kaleidoscopic spectrum of multipolarity, and especially with the global South, among the global South. You see, whether it is G77 and China, for some reason, the nomenclature, I'll not go into that, has carried on from the earlier times as it is. Or, when we engage with fellow Commonwealth countries, I think it was a very far-sighted decision on the part of India to be a member of the Commonwealth, even though we were for so long under British colonialism. You see, now coming to the brass tacks, what, about 55, 57 countries now, or around that, 54, 55, whatever, Commonwealth countries, right? And fellow developing countries, most of them, I mean, you leave aside, UK and Canada and Australia, etc. And so much to do, and an extremely important group of countries in the context of the UN reform, in the context of our collective efforts to fulfill the obligations, this global compact that is incumbent upon all member states to achieve the SDGs, the 2030 agenda, as was highlighted by Dr. Shidi. Look at our engagement with the small island development states. You see, a few in Africa, some in Asia, some, of course, Latin America and the Caribbean. And again, in the larger context of the expansion, the long awaited expansion of the UN Security Council, the overall UN reform, these are, I'm not just giving some examples, I think these are extremely important engagements. Of course, closer to home, I would say that unfortunately, given the understandably very adversarial relationship between India and her Western neighbor, that is Pakistan, the SAARC process has not brought deliverables that really are required for a region of SAARC countries. Now, after Afghanistan joined 8 countries and facing similar challenges of development, you see, of poverty, of hunger, clean drinking water, and what you have. So there, I'll not get much into the geopolitics of that. But I think a concerted effort needs to be made by all stakeholders to reactivate that process. Otherwise, what we have been experiencing is what a colleague of mine from another SAARC country, who was, we were together in Saudi Arabia, used to say that, look, SAARC has so much spirit. The only challenge is, and the biggest challenge is, it needs to be potted. You know, so that is where. Now I'll, Dr. Adam, with your permission, I'll touch upon 3 specific areas. UN reform, already I have spoken very briefly, but I think having been actively engaged in this, all the relevant issues related to UN reform, you know, especially with our friends and allies and partners in these 3 continents that we are discussing this morning, I think it remains really a challenge, and there is a need. You know, I was very recently, I was with a German diplomat. You know, we used to engage on G4 in New York, and the G4 is still there. It still has the same goals, the same objectives. But I think along the line, of course, the very efficacy of multilateralism and the United Nations itself has been time and again, it has been very rightly, it has come under a big question mark. But I think unless we are there, you see, with like-minded countries in Africa. I mean, I recall the days of our going as observers to African Union summits in places like Banjul, Ethiopia, where Ambassador Gurjeet Singh was there, and trying together to navigate through the different approaches to UN Security Council reform. You see, whether it is, you know, what the G4 came up with, or what the Azulwini consensus within Africa, their proposals, what the SIDS, the small island development states, had to put on the table in terms of their proposals and suggestions. So I think it is high time. Of course, we live in times that have been becoming increasingly volatile, increasingly turbulent and challenging. And I think I would say that it is nothing profound I'm saying, that I think in the recent years, starting February 2022, of course, whatever may have been the background, whatever may have been the provocations, you see, NATO's eastward expansion and so on. But Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we have seen the United Nations has been a dismal, unfortunately. It has been helpless. You see,
the Secretary General has time and again expressed his own exasperation. And now, 7th October, what happened? Undoubtedly, it's a diabolical terrorist attack, by Hamas, which needs unequivocal condemnation. Terrorism, zero policy on terrorism, absolutely imperative. But look what has been done by Israel in terms of retaliation. Grossly disproportionate, and innocent men, women, children. I mean, it is not that it is just a statistic. I mean, every human life. What is greater than the life, than the right to live and human life? So, as of day before yesterday, those of you who follow Al Jazeera, that I think has been covering these developments in Gaza and of course the region most comprehensively among all media outlets, organizations in my view. It is 31,000, depriving them of the most basic necessities of life. This amounts to a genocide. And I would like to really, in my personal view, I think the initiative taken by South Africa. Of course, I'm not getting into the legalities of that. Now, what would happen with regard to the initial sort of interim order given by the International Court of Justice. But that is something, when we talk of multipolarity, I think this has to take into account really a leadership role, and we are playing, but I think in a more proactive way, in a more nuanced way, when the entire international community is facing such unprecedented challenges. You see, now the G20 undoubtedly was, the declaration, the consensus, very heartening. I think the way India's leadership steered the whole process. But Dr. Adam, if you ask me, I think the consensus on the outcome document, whatever might be the hype created in the media and people saying that came suddenly overnight and out of nowhere, I mean that very unexpected, etc. Very heartening, all the nitty-gritty that went into it. It was very challenging, but to me it was not unexpected. Right? And we can discuss that separately why I feel so. In my view, the most heartening and I think really the most significant achievement of that summit in September last year, the G20, was, well, the African Union being invited by consensus to become a member of the G20. And of course, also the initiative that was launched with regard to the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, as also another initiative that was launched in the area of renewable energy, biofuels and other renewable sources of energy. And since I have been involved in preparing two new courses here on this prestigious campus, Energy Security and Diplomacy and Diaspora and Diplomacy, that I am currently teaching. I'll conclude my remarks with another maybe a minute or so. I think energy security is of paramount importance to the international community, and the challenges for global South are similar, and so are the opportunities. So we need to very, very substantially come up with ways and means to significantly expand cooperation in this area, and of course meeting this critical global challenge of climate change should be propelling all of us to work much faster in that direction. And diaspora, that is where, again, so much, because it is demographics, it is the youth, it is the students, it is the professionals, It is the entrepreneurs in these three continents, whether it is Asia, whether it is Africa, whether it is Latin America. We are doing currently case studies, not only India, which is the world's largest diaspora. We are taking countries from different parts, including the Middle East, including the challenges of refugees, IDPs, the Syrian conflict, Yemen, right, and so on. And of course, your large diaspora populations, the whole, in the Latin, in South America, countries like Mexico, Brazil, in the Middle East, Lebanon, and so on. So I think finding platforms, forging collaborations, bringing the youth together, bringing students, professionals, entrepreneurs, with the objective, with the goal of really taking South-South cooperation to greater heights. So that is what I would say. Thank you for giving me the floor for so long, and I'm open whenever the chair throws into the questions. Thank you so much. Shukran jazeelan.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Arora. And now, Ambassador Singh, I know that you have to leave at this time. So we'd like, before you leave our discussion, to thank you for accepting my invitation and join us today. Thank you so much, Ambassador Singh. So now let's
wants to make some comment.
You don't want to leave at this time.
Okay.
So now, as we have heard about the potential collaboration across continents from our esteemed expert today, I would like to delve more deeper into some specific themes. Starting first by my next question will be to Professor Shiddeek. So what is the role of international institutions like United Nations Office of South-South Cooperation and other regional institutions and organizations in facilitating and supporting South-South cooperation efforts? And also, I would like to ask you, could you please highlight some of their efforts in engaging in discussion with North-South institutions to foster development finance given to Global South countries?
Regarding the last point, the one on...
we are not able to hear.
Can you hear me?
No.
Because I'm on.
We can't hear you, Professor Hoare.
So
Hello?
is it online?
Where is the...
I'm online. I can see
but
you.
we can't hear. We need to hear, no? 1 minute, Professor.
I can try unmuting the system.
Unmute, Shashikaran.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Where is IT guy?
And the battery is only 22%. We also need to get more batteries.
IT guy.
We were hearing quite well without this. I don't know why he put his laptop.
So anyone can open YouTube Live. It is on YouTube Live, so maybe you can hear him from YouTube Live.
Can you hear me now?
The speakers. Hello. Can you? 1 minute. Professor Hoare, can you speak? Can you speak?
Can you hear me?
We just got you back. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Regarding the traditional cooperation agencies from the UN system and the multilateral development banks, they were designed for North-South cooperation. Remember that the development paradigm under which they were established was that development was for countries to become like the countries of the North. So the typical project was the transfer of technology from the North to the South, always assuming that the technology and the contributions from the North were better than anything that the South could deliver. In addition to that, most of the core funding for these organizations come from countries from the north. So basically, the architecture of the UN system and the multilateral development banks is geared towards providing the vision and the. Can you hear me?
No, yeah, that's all right. There was
Yes, sir.
another issue, not the hearing. We can hear you.
Okay.
For the
And
top-
the paradigm of northern development to the south, that has changed again in the last few years, when some countries, some organizations, or UNDP always had it in itself to be a champion of technical cooperation among developing countries. But now almost all UN agencies have programs or units devoted to South-South cooperation. Let's not kid ourselves. Part of it was because new funding became available, particularly from China at first. Now other southern countries are contributing. But the good news is that as a result of our work in the office, now the UN system has a joint strategy for South-South cooperation and operational guidelines for South-South cooperation, which did not exist until 2020, to give you an idea how long it took and how difficult it was. By definition, if a UN entity participates, it becomes triangular cooperation because there is a third actor that is the agency itself. So one of the main components of our work with them is to get the most possible exchanges among the southern countries to become more facilitators than operators of the cooperation. And we are in the middle of that process. My colleagues are continuing it, but let's face it, it's difficult because, again, most of the funding comes from the north and most of the agenda comes from the north. Regarding traditional donors, as I mentioned before, for many years they neglected South-South cooperation and then lately made an effort to incorporate South-South cooperation, the main actors, the so-called emerging economies or emerging countries, concept that I know many countries don't like, as traditional donors. And that has been the work of the OECD, the DAC, and many bilaterals, trying to get them to use the same methodologies and the same logic of development. We have to say that the countries from the south have been resisting. On the other hand, the countries of the north tell us, okay, you say South-South cooperation is what it is. Go back to the definitions that you can see in the Buenos Aires Declaration. But those are a series of principles. How do you measure that? How do you document that? How you organize that relative to the development priorities of both countries? So they have some legitimate points that now, at the political level, some of the leading countries of the South are working in New York to try to answer and to generate a more solid conceptual framework for South-South cooperation. Regarding, again, the developed countries, in addition of them trying to get developing countries to join the DAC or to join the DAC methodologies, many of them are supporting cooperation among developing countries through the triangular modality. Ambassador Singh mentioned that India is a major recipient of that type of cooperation. First, because India is a country very much appreciated by most developed countries among the leading developing countries. It has a lot to contribute. Also, politically, it's very important for developed countries. And considering that India doesn't take for itself most of that aid, now they challenge that collaboration, supporting South-South cooperation. The same case with Brazil, where I had the honor to serve. Brazil said, we don't want more bilateral aid. Give us the money or finance South-South cooperation. So there has been a massive expansion of triangular cooperation in the last few years. Many donors, increasing number of donors are supporting this type of efforts. It is very strong in Latin America, within Latin America, because affinities are very high, transaction costs are very low, and donors see a very high impact promoting this type of exchanges among developing countries. So recapping the answer, the multilateral organizations are trying to become more engaged in South-South cooperation. On the other hand, it goes against their traditional DNA and their main source of funding, so it is not a smooth process by any means. And secondly, donor countries are increasingly financing South-South cooperation, and for which the countries of the South have to be sure and have to be confident to receive that assistance in a way that it does not eliminate the virtues and the characteristics of South-South cooperation. Over.
Thank you, Professor Shidi. My next question is to Ambassador Tapar. Cultural exchange is a crucial aspect of South-South cooperation. In your opinion, what steps can India take to strengthen culture ties and people-to-people connections with Latin American countries and generally in Global South?
Yeah, thank you, Professor. In fact, India Soft is a very powerful tool which has been applied since, well, not just recent times, but many decades. We have cultural centers, India cultural centers operating in various capitals, where we are already assigning experts, maybe in yoga, traditional dance forms, Indian classical music, and sometimes also languages, also Indian languages. We have also set up India chairs, where professors and universities are dispersing knowledge about India studies. We also have distinguished scholars coming in, and this is at the invitation of the Indian Council of Cultural Relations. It's headed by a very senior diplomat. And in fact, the chair of that ICCR is reporting to the Prime Minister's office and senior political leadership. It has always been a part and parcel of India's diplomacy. More than that, India's traditional, platform about being a non-violent pacifist country, the land of Gandhiji, the peaceful vision, the spirituality, the yoga. Now latest, we have the World Yoga Day, which was started during a few years ago, and all, experts and various stakeholders all over the world are very, very enthusiastic. We are also, of course, trying to create awareness about traditional medicines, traditional medical knowledge, Ayurveda, homeopathy, etc., which do not rely so much on chemicals, but more on natural ingredients. So these are some of the things. And of course, not to forget Bollywood and India films, which anyway, and the Indian music and the dance forms, modern pop, and also the classical dances of India. So this is because India is such an old civilization. We must not forget that one of our holy books in Hinduism is the Samved, which is all about music. And the classical dance forms actually have a divine kind of ecosystem where dance is offered as a prayer to God. And we have, therefore, these very, very in-depth concepts, and knowledge is considered also epitomized in a form of a goddess, Saraswati ji. And so these are some of the things which are there in Indian culture, and which, of course, do create, I would say, create harmony and a bit of outreach. But really, my priority would be still economics, because we live in a very, very deprived world, as I said, and almost $1 billion, billion people out of 7.58 billion are still below the poverty line, and it is really, really failing. After 80 years, the Bretton Woods system, the UN system has not been able to deliver. So we do need to stop big declarations. We need to now get down to business. We've just heard some very, very interesting analysis about the G20 summit. I endorse and absolutely join and celebrate what has happened. But as an academic and as a former practitioner, I would still say I would have been even more delighted if we had set up a G20 multilateral mechanism, development bank, and with a mandate to immediately operationalize within 3 to 6 months after the Sherpas have got this together, immediate aid and assistance. Because what is the biggest problem today is that aid is subject to bureaucracy, whether it's the UN or the Bretton Woods. And the other thing which I want to get across is, the lack of democratic functioning in these institutions, because the voting share in the World Bank and the IMF, again, is dependent on the contribution of the countries. Even the chief executive, the IMF managing director, is a European, the World Bank president is an American. So how do countries of the South Pacific, small island countries from Africa, who don't know anything about these procedures, how are they going to get a voice? And how are we going to check what Jason Heikel of London School of Economics cautions about, paying for loans at the rate of 15% when you borrow from IMF and Bretton Woods? There is a straitjacketed system. The conditionalities of the IMF and the structural adjustment programs of the World Bank take over your economy. You can't even breathe. You just have to become a paying up mechanism. So these are aspects which do need to be tackled. And we've just heard Ambassador Arora talking about climate finance. We've had other areas. Funding is a critical issue. The other thing which I wanted to point out is if government and Bretton Woods and multilateral systems can't deliver, can we get the corporate sector involved? I think the money lies there now. The MNCs and the corporations of the North are making a lot of money from southern markets. Well, it will be for everyone's welfare if some kind of conscientious CSR is insisted upon by recipient countries, because when a multinational entity invests in another country in the South, it pays minimal wages. It may not even give full regard to environmental safeguards. We've just had OECD, create a treaty system where there'll be a global minimum corporate tax. Hopefully, it will be exceeded to about 140 countries have given their support for it. 15% would be the global corporate minimum tax. If that happens, that'll be very, very good. And I believe that this would result in reallocation of $200 billion, to the southern markets. But in any case, we do need to create more, optimal equations and handshakes when FDI and investments come into global South countries. So the corporate sector could actually come in, because in the long term, it is in the interest of these MNCs to keep the southern markets afloat. Because if the southern markets start getting into a state of poverty and deprivation, who's going to buy their goods and services? So my focus again would be still on economics. Now, India, of course, and just to make some general remarks with your permission, India is a benign donor. India is perceived to be a benign partner. India is sought after all the time because we sit with them across the table. We try and learn from them their problems, and we are very transparent in our, aid dispersal systems. We are audited here. We are accountable to our parliament and to our people. And what we do is we try and, of course, give our companies a lot of opportunity under the lines of credit. That is the gain for us. Indian companies who, are partnering with others outside, setting up projects under lines of credit, well, they have an opportunity to know the foreign markets, to make connections. This is the one thing which accrues. And of course, the other thing which we get is a lot of goodwill, which we try and utilize for joint positions in multilateral organizations. But at the end of the day, what we do is create more skilled, aware, expert human resources. And I've always stressed that as a diplomat, my visiting card to presidents and heads of government was that we will upgrade your stakeholders, we will upgrade your HR systems. And frankly, this is more lasting and enduring than creating a hospital or a stadium. For that matter, India does do that also. I mean, we've created Shapoorji Pallonji, for example, created a huge stadium in Georgetown, Guyana, British Guyana. We've done other projects like Ambassador Arora mentioned, Parliament Building in Kabul. We have, I said, given already $32 billion of aid. We give medicines during hurricanes and tsunami. For example, in 2004, I remember when there was a big tsunami in December or November, we had given assistance to the tune of $25 million. We had sent ships to Indonesia, and we had sent our crews and to Maldives and other countries. So we are a benign partner. We do want to, of course, find new markets for our companies and corporations. But when we do that, it's with the intention of mutual win-win. So this is very different from just getting into their natural resources. Some countries have that. They want to home into their natural resources, minerals, etc. But what we do is bring a more balanced equation. And I think the southern countries appreciate that. So India is very, very welcome as a southern country. There is, of course, a limitation. We are a huge population of 1.4 billion. We have our own challenges. We can't be as liberal, in dispersal of financial assistance. We make sure that we get we make sure that every dollar which is spent by us and by other countries gets the optimal benefit. In fact, I have had the privilege as a chargé in Suriname of bidding against another country, and our estimation was $3 million cheaper. And at the end of the day, I got the deal back for India, reinstated back, and then we, of course, matched up the line of credit with the other competing country and gave another $3 million for spares and equipment. So India is always welcome. And we can continue on this, but we do need to energize and accelerate this because the patience, the mood of the southern countries is very, very low. What with COVID having dented the world economy by $13 trillion, what with the Ukraine war and now Hamas, where can the southern countries go? The system is failing. So there's a breakup. I always say in my utterances and including my lectures in class that the cause of the political divide and conflict is actually much deeper. It is economic. It all starts from there because there is restlessness, there is suspicion. People are breaking away from the liberal Western order and they are going to new partners. Why? Because this system didn't deliver. So if we want the world to stay, united, if the liberal West and the northern countries want a structured system to prevail and not more disruption and conflict, then we had better, start being more empathetic to the cause of the South. And I'm also very, very fond of saying this. Who taught us all this? Who taught us about, the Bill of Rights and the personal freedoms, etc.? We got it all from the developed countries. So now it's our time, therefore, to apply this knowledge and to ask for this. And therefore, coming back to my earlier point, if we have leaders in southern countries, if we have communities and stakeholders who are informed and know their arguments and have the knowledge about these issues, well, they will raise it in a more informed manner in multilateral gatherings, and we should be able to get more attention. Economically, as I said, there is a complete case for having complementarity between the North and the South. So before we let the situation deteriorate so much, because of changing technology, because of so much of digital divide, and because of deprivation of knowledge and education to vast communities all across Africa, Latin America, and Asia, we should make sure that there is more equitable dispersal of resources. It has been estimated by Professor, Jason Heikel and the World Inequality Lab that for every dollar of aid which comes into the South, almost $24 leaks out, because this is through, the minimum wages the wages not being paid equitably. This is because of multinationals being able to, manipulate bills and even, show earnings as of offshore in tax havens. And of course, monopolizing the opportunities in the stock and equity capital markets in southern countries. And of course, also sometimes, if it is required, insisting on sale of public sector assets because they're not able to pay the loans. So they are doing all this with all these leakages. Therefore, the aid which they get is very, very nominal. And so the benchmarks of world poverty, which is about global poverty, which is about $1.90 per day, the hunger criteria, which is about 2,000 calories a day, whereas actually it has been proven that physical laborers like a rickshaw puller in India or an agricultural laborer needs to get 4,000 calories at least. And also people who have special medical conditions, they need more, nutrients, etc. So the world hunger criteria, the poverty criteria, even these need to be made more realistic. So India, of course, as a leader, as a respected, player now in technology, and now a very important economy, can start rubbing off some of these knowledge realms off to its southern partners. And because of the very open nature of Indian democracy, it's a very secular, vibrant, aspirational community based on values and principles. Indian diaspora was mentioned by Ambassador Sanjeev Arora, which is we are so proud of it. They are all leaders in Google, in Microsoft, in banks, even the World Bank president is of Indian origin. We have prime ministers of Indian origin. So Indian diaspora is, of course, showing the way it is respected. So with all these credentials, I think India has the passport, India has the visiting card to reach out to the southern countries. Our last summit before the G20, the Voice of the Global South, I think it's a very, very important initiative. And it was a virtual summit which lasted for 2 days. And the inaugural and the concluding session was done by head of state, head of government. These are all very important initiatives. We've already mentioned about the inclusion of the African Union as a member now of the G20. I think it is a very important step. So if we continue in this way, and if we empower the South, that's the key word, empowerment. And empowerment in technology, empowerment in expertise, empowerment, of course, if possible, in direct transfer of financial resources. I have said, need to upgrade some of our grants and aids. And I think that will give some relief and succor and some kind of positivity to the current negativity which prevails, because I, at least as a practitioner of foreign policy and as an IR analyst, I feel that we cannot let this global order just disrupt, because if we don't, I think we are on a path of self-destruction. And not to forget here, of course, what James Weekly has been not cautioning about, but just mentioning, even during COVID, the defense expenditure of the world really was just plateauing out. It did not come down. So billions of dollars are being, expended every year, when those very dollars could be applied for rehabilitation and upgradation of deprived communities. If there were, on the other hand, more consensus, more handshake, more understanding between countries, then the need to keep upgrading and pumping in millions and billions into defense technologies would also ebb. And the way forward for that, according to me, is giving a boost to economic multilateralism, because the arteries of economics goes right into every human being. Today, we live in a meshed community. Today, the world is all connected through online. So your economic status affects me, and I take inspiration, or I take, shall we say, dejection based on what my stakeholders and counterpart countries are doing. So economics is so important for every leader and every community to realize their personal freedoms and their basic human rights. So if that is the cause, if that is the whole framework, then why can we not get more economic cooperation going? I think all countries, whatever be their political entities or governance systems, it could be communism, socialism, capitalism, whatever it is, they are all basically targeting one important priority: getting the upgradation, economic upgradation of their community, upgrading the livelihood and the living standards of their people. If that is the priority, and if it is so that we are living in a digital world where physical frontiers are fading and everything is about, global supply chains, and every country is contributing to the global supply chains, that means there's a common kind of process, a common destiny in contributing to economic multilateralism. So this is the way forward. even if political multilateralism is failing, we should emphasize this, and that would curb, that would curtail, and I think cool down the world's engine. And based on the consensus which emerges in economic issues, I think we can start sharing a little more. And of course, the Global South can precipitate this, the Global South can catalyze this, and India can show leadership in this whole thing. Thank you so much.
Right. Thanks a lot, Ambassador Tapar. Now I have my next question is to Ambassador Arora. So, Ambassador Arora, beyond the traditional economic ties, how can India and Asia, Middle East specifically, work together to address shared challenges related to energy security?
I think my voice is laudable. Thank you.
YouTube.
Yeah. With regard to energy security, there are initiatives already in the works at different levels. And of course, there is a vast potential to collaborate in new approaches and new initiatives. You see, bilaterally, take India's example. Our cooperation, not only with regard to the traditional fuels, fossil fuels, where of course it is a very large importing and consuming country, importing significant quantities, whether it is of oil, natural gas, etc. Not only in terms of fossil fuels, but renewables, it has been growing, right? Now, first take the example of fossil fuels. I'll give a few off the cuff, a few practical examples. Largest reservoirs of natural gas, of course. I mean, and I am for the purpose of this discourse, I am deliberately keeping our traditional sources of energy, most notably in the Gulf countries. Although that again would be, up to an extent, a good example of South-South collaboration. But I'm keeping them aside, given the very high income levels, and given the overall extent of prosperity in those countries. I'm keeping aside Russia, the major source of our energy supplies. I mean, I've told you about a few countries in Africa. I've mentioned a few countries in Latin America. And in the context of our increasingly proactive multifaceted collaboration with the countries of ASEAN, again, our collaborations in the area of energy security are growing. We also, I think, again, the very important dimension of technology, Mr. Thapar has been highlighting. You see, given our expertise, given the technological strengths that we have, and given the sheer size, scale of operations, the resources, the competences of our corporate sector. So we are now at a stage where we can have, in the context of South-South cooperation, also initiatives like utilization in times of distress, in times when the world energy markets are under so much duress, under so much stress and challenges, utilization of strategic reserves, right? And we have expanded these. If the United States could utilize her strategic reserves, I think at least thrice during the very first about 18 months of the war in Ukraine, right? But for whom were those utilized? Largely, or perhaps fully, for the global north. But the point I'm making is that given our resources, given our competences, expertise, do it in the framework of South-South cooperation, in addition to your commercial deals, which we are doing, whether it is with Brazil or Venezuela or Nigeria or other countries like in Nigeria I mentioned, and so on, right? And then, of course, at regional levels, it's very important. And that is where I think, in terms of regional groupings, in the entire realm of economic collaborations, I think this has been very brilliantly presented by Professor Thapar. I think there is a very, very long way to go. Certain initiatives that I mentioned at the outset, whether it is IPSA, right, or of course SAARC has its own peculiar challenges, or among the Commonwealth countries, a very, very major constituency of the South, or India-AU. Well, it is an extremely important partnership for a multi-dimensional, it's an extremely important platform for a multi-dimensional partnership, of which the area of energy indeed is extremely important. I would say even critical. And in terms of the nitty-gritty of diplomacy, I think we also need to strengthen these mechanisms. You see, for example, I mean, in my various assignments, whether it was in the UN context that I mentioned, or having spent long years in the Gulf countries as ambassador to Qatar, and so on, earlier as young diplomat in Saudi Arabia. You see, now what I used to see in New York was that the India-Gulf, the India-GCC engagement during the UNGA session. I mean, that is fine. Of course, we go there to practice on the floor of the United Nations our multipolarity, and a growing engagement with countries around the world to strengthen our cooperation. But why not formally institutionalize an annual India GCC summit? If not annual, have it biennial, have it once in 2 years. You see, I mean, you have an annual forum with the ASEAN, right? Likewise, we had started some years back the India-Africa Forum. It still exists, but I think the frequency of that engagement via that specific platform has come down. It has become actually fairly irregular in terms of its meetings, in terms whether at the summit level or the level of foreign ministers, and of course multilaterally. I mean, I've talked bilaterally. I've talked bilaterally. I have spoken to an extent regionally. I would also spend perhaps half a minute multilaterally, because you see, well, what is one of the Sustainable Development Goals is availability of clean and affordable energy. So, the type of organization that Dr. Professor Shadiq is heading, other fora, when there are special summits that take place. I think in this context, of course, where I can see a much greater proactivism on India's part is in the context of the UNFCCC. The COP forum, the COP summits, the Conference of Parties, the climate change summits, to put it simply, the United Nations Framework Convention on climate change. So there, yes, and I think it is appreciated. Not only appreciated, I think that has over the years led to a much heightened engagement, right? That cuts across countries and continents. But I'll focus here, given the theme of this afternoon, I'll focus on the global south, you see, where the global south, and of course, that is one area where, as you know very well, that there is a very significant congruence in the approaches of India and China.
Copenhagen.
Yeah, right. So, and of course, the last COP and so on, the last was UAE. So that is where the global south positions have coalesced to a very significant degree, when it comes to climate financing. And where things were at the COP summit some years back, and where we are today, there has been, of course, there is really a long way to go, but there has been progress in terms of sharing technologies. And of course, the very first, very basic fundamental principle that it has to be a common but differentiated responsibility. Because much as we are strongly committed to our obligations to combating the scourge of climate change, we have to balance our approaches with our paramount developmental imperatives. Okay. And the per capita emission of greenhouse gases in our case, and the same is true of the rest of the global south, is much less than compared to the developed countries. the United States, and so on, and other developing countries. So these are some observations in response to your question. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Ambassador Arora. And now I would like to open the floor to questions from our participants here on campus. Please, if you have a question, raise your hand and start by introducing yourself. And your question is mentioned, it is a general question or addressed to one of our experts. Please. Yes. You just move.
Good afternoon, panel, distinguished panel. It was a very, very enlightening presentation. Thank you. My name is Anuradha. I am a master's student of Diplomacy, Law and Business. And my question is a general question. Happy to be answered by anybody. So we've talked about multilateral institutions, both economic and political. So do you think the existing institutions are well equipped to deliver or to address the pressing challenges of the global south and foster South-South cooperation? Or do you think there needs to be a more like a tailor-made approach, a minilateral approach, more issue-based or, minilateral organizations to address such challenges more effectively?
Okay, so then we can.
Yeah, I'd like to just mention, yes, I was, doing a pros and cons analysis about multilateral organizations, development institutions. They're actually structured well. They have a lot of expertise and there is a lot of funding. The problem is it has to be calibrated according to the southern countries' requirements. And one issue, of course, is can we get more arguments and conversations about the global south? We do need their priorities to be brought onto center stage. And I had mentioned that unfortunately we don't have enough representation because the voting shares, are based on your contribution. Now, this is something which needs to be changed. And because the global south must have its priorities on center stage, and there cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach. The structured adjustment programs and the conditionalities by the IMF when they disperse loans are more or less the panacea, one-size-fits-all cures everybody. This cannot happen because I have been saying this to my students and classes that, for example, there could be populations who are better in sports. There are populations which are better in cultural music. There are populations who are good like India in software. Now, if we get a loan, presuming if India were to wind the clock back to 40, 50 years ago, and we wanted to go into software, then, ICT would be a priority for us. Now, would the World Bank or the IMF give us something in that direction? So this is what we need to, get going in the multilateral institution. I also feel I have posted sometimes on the social media about this, and I mentioned it here. I think the corporate sector needs to get into these conversations. These are political, economic, social conversations. There's a lot of excellence in the private sector. There's a lot of dynamism and there's a lot of accountability. I mean, it filters everything every 6 months, 3 months. If you're not fit for the job, well, they'll see someone else. So the corporate sector, I think, needs to work in partnership. And I believe that the World Economic Forum, Davos, and other, such mechanisms, we need to have more healthy consultations. Even if there's a G20 summit, I think there should be something with the corporate sector. In all these leadership forums and fora, we need to get the private sector involved. If nothing else, it will be good publicity for them if they announce some aid or assistance, because they'll be splashed all across the news when they meet, these leaders. So we have to encourage the private sector because that is the way we get more funds into the IMF and the World Bank. And the one thing which would happen is if we get funds in a more broad-based manner, I believe, and this is my gut reaction, I believe that the interest rates would also go down. It's a simple question of supply and demand. If there's more supply of funds, there would be easier interest rates and there would be more genial temperament in applying the conditions for the loan. So these are some of the things which we need to get across. We need to make them more broad-based. We need to get them more democratized. We need to get them to consider more priorities. And this needs to be a mutual engagement. Right now, it's a top-down approach. It's just handed down, do or die. Either take this or leave it. And if you're not able to pay up, you'll be blacklisted. Now, that kind of approach is very, very, I would say unilateral or one-sided. So that's where, how is a country which is a poor country in the South Pacific or in Africa, how it's going to negotiate with the World Bank and IMF? It doesn't see the fine print, doesn't have the lawyers. India might have had, and we do have the capacity because of our knowledge, which is what I said. We need